Hello, good day. Welcome to the fourth episode of Coffee with Colette. Today's episode, we have the pleasure of having Mrs. Molly Madden Bursey. She is a force to be reckoned with. Hello, Molly. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing all right. We are in a really interesting time right now in not only in the United States, but globally. And I wanted to really bring to light and talk with Molly about her work. She's the volunteer legislative lead for the Texas chapter of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. And shortly after she moved to New Braunfels in 2016, she founded the first Moms Demand Action group outside of a major city in Texas. And she has served as a local group leader and local group manager in Central Texas. She graduated from Harding University in 1998 with a BA in special education. And she taught middle school special education for 12 years. And during that first semester in teaching, she watched helplessly as the shooting at the Columbine High School unfolded. And as a new mom, she was overwhelmed with despair when 20 first graders and 6 educators were murdered inside their school in Newton, Connecticut. And since then, she has learned about the daily toll of gun violence in our cities and gun violence at the hands of domestic abusers and the lethality of suicide attempts with a gun, which has driven the compulsion to change gun laws in the culture in Texas and in the nation. And she lives in New Braunfels with her husband, Eric, and their amazing adopted son. And I wanted to really have an opportunity to talk with her and answer questions that the public may have in Central Texas or in Comal County about truths, myths, what's going on locally. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Colette. It's I can go on and on about gun violence prevention, as you know, we're all in a really difficult time in this country. So I'm excited to talk about what we can do, positive actions we can take. And I'm excited that you're running.
Thank you. For those of you that don't know that are watching, I'm running for County Commissioner for Precinct 3.
My precinct, I get to vote for you.
She does. It's very exciting. So those who are unfamiliar with Moms Demand Action, what are kind of some of the basics of what common sense gun legislation means?
Well, sure. Anything that Moms Demand Action advocates for, any policy that we get behind, has to be evidence-based. First of all, has to have evidence-based research backing it up to actually reduce gun violence. And when we talk about common sense, we're talking about things that when you're having conversations, most people can't believe that they haven't already passed. Our biggest and kind of the cornerstone of all gun violence prevention is requiring a background check on every single gun sale, which Texas currently does not require. I think the Tribune did a recent poll where close to 90% of Texans are in favor of a background check on every gun sale. And we've seen here in Texas how that one loophole, there are many loopholes in our gun laws by design. The shooter in Midland, Odessa got his gun after he failed a background check. He got it through a private sale. And then the shooter in Sutherland Springs, a man from New Braunfels, was able to, the requirements for reporting to the NICS system that does the background checks weren't strong enough, and so a convicted domestic abuser, pretty heinous domestic abuser, was able to pass a background check. So that's our main thing. And then
let me interrupt you real quick. NICS? What is that short for?
National Instant Check.
Is it a C, or I guess it's a
NICS? Yes.
Okay.
So it's a database maintained by the FBI and the ATF, and typically a background check takes less than 90 seconds, right. Unless there's a flag, and then they have to search through paper records, which is a whole other thing. There's so many. So basically, for 30 years, the gun lobby has written our gun laws while we let it go. Mm-hmm. And I call it a death by 1,000 paper cuts. They do these little tiny chipping away at our gun laws until we get to the point where, the FBI is not allowed to computerize the records. And so, as in the case of the shooter in Charleston who killed 9 people in their church, the hate crime. He had a flag on his background check, but it took longer than 72 hours to return that background check. So he was what we call a default proceed. He was able to just pass it because it had taken longer than 72 hours. That's another loophole we call the Charleston loophole. Wow. When you, if it takes too long, you can just go ahead and pass it. We're not going to wait for your background check to come out.
Wow.
Yeah.
So just to give a few statistics or facts for our audience, there's an average of about 3,288 people that die by gun death in Texas, with about 11.8% of deaths per 100,000 people. And then Texas has the highest 29th rate, is 29th in the union on gun deaths in the United States. And the largest killer of Black children in Texas is by guns.
Yeah, it's the #1 killer of Black children nationwide. And the #2 of all children.
Wow. Yeah. And of course, Black children are 2 times as more likely to die as their white peers by guns. One thing I did not know that we had talked about is in Texas, 79% of intimate partner gun homicide victims are women. There was a death a few weeks ago. Portio, I told you that she was originally from. I don't know about originally, but went to high school together. Williams in Corsicana, she and her son were killed. I have not heard a lot of updates on that recently. Of course, there's a lot been going on.
Right.
And so if I'm trying to look to see if there's any particular statistics that kind of stick out. It says that the rate of gun deaths in the United States has increased 18% since 2009 to 2018. And yet the rate of gun suicide has increased 19%. Mm-hmm. That's usually when you have people that are working towards something that it goes down. And I guess this is what I'm guessing here that would be because I've just kind of growing up, I had this idea of the NRA as being like an education center. Yeah. And it's slowly, well, I don't know about slowly, you tell me, has completely kind of changed and I don't see it that way anymore.
Well, so yeah, what we say is it's not your grandfather's NRA anymore. It did start out as an organization for hunters. They talked a lot about gun safety. It was just, an organization, and slowly solely works for the gun manufacturers. And the gun manufacturers only purpose is to sell guns and gun accessories. So it's become the lobbying arm of the gun manufacturers. And any, just to give an example of the power that they hold, even up in Austin, when we talk about gun suicides and we talk about the huge uptick in new gun owners with COVID, one thing that I've learned being a part of Moms Who in Action, and it's really important for every parent and every gun owner, is the idea of responsible storage of your gun. And this past ledge session, I drove. It was a day. I had a lot of car trouble, but I got up to Austin to testify on a bill that would have just promoted the idea of safe storage. And, no requirements, but, I don't remember the text of the bill. And I got all the way to the hearing room and the bill had been yanked because the NRA's, the lobbyists there for the TSRA, which is the Texas State Rifle Association, and then the NRA lobbyists had said, we're not going to let this go. They could just walk into lawmakers' office up there in Austin and say, we're not having this. I mean, can you imagine an organization that would be against the responsible storage of a firearm to protect children?
Yeah, no. Mm-mm. I mean, what are they? What is the benefit? I mean, they're still going to sell as many guns as they do. Like, I guess I'm at a loss for.
Well, I think the NRA has also become
like a political force,
right? A far right, really inflammatory and a lot of times racist organization. So they instead of the idea of responsible gun ownership, which we as an organization, respect the right of responsible gun owners. We are, a lot of us are gun owners. And the second part of any common sense gun legislation is it has to, for us, if we're gonna, get behind it, it has to respect the Second Amendment. But the NRA and the gun lobby, the rest of the gun lobby, they have taken this just really extremist view. When the Las Vegas shooting happened and the issue came up about bump stocks, they opposed banning bump stocks. And it's our belief that if you're not going to compromise at all,
yeah,
you're going to finally fizzle out. I mean, it's too much gun death. And I hope, yeah.
Well, so there are a lot of, I believe, like these outspoken voices that kind of work. I mean, like the NRA, political arms, PACs that work to kind of undermine transparency and the spread of information about gun legislation. As a political candidate, at the forum, I had somebody, back in February here in Comal County, I had somebody come up to me and was like, yeah, I heard that you're pro-gun. And I'm like, and, as if a Democrat can't be pro-gun. And what does that mean, pro-gun? Like, well, yeah, I own guns, but that it's not an either or. It's not like you sacrifice your Second Amendment to get to own a gun. I mean, or to not own a gun. Like, it just there's such a stereotype about who's pro Second Amendment just for something that's like our literally title says, common sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the Second Amendment, support for the Second Amendment has become perverted, really. I mean, we support the Second Amendment. It's in our Constitution.
Yeah.
And what, especially here in New Braunfels, when I'm doing my relational canvassing, which just means, talking to your folks and convincing that, listening to them and their concerns and then, trying to persuade them. One thing that's really stuck out to me is that the gun lobby would like for us to believe that there is a binary choice, just like you said, between everybody armed to the teeth 100% of the time, no restrictions, and melting all your guns down into a statue of Gandhi. And that's just not where most people, especially Texans, we have a long history of responsible gun ownership.
Right.
That's not where the vast majority of Americans are. Mm-hmm. I mean, is there an issue like background checks where 90% of Americans agree on something, and yet the bill for requiring a background check on every gun sale, H.R. 8, has been sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk over a year, just sitting there, just to require a background check.
Wow. So what are some of the ways that you help to educate, to dispel these kind of myths that people have, and to kind of break through entrenched stereotypes that people have? I know it's education and just conversations are part of it. But how do you, there has to be people that you talk to or groups that you talk to that you can give them the facts and tell them what you believe in. They still just don't want to listen. I mean, how do you?
I think I rarely, if it's a conversation, if it's not on social media, I rarely have someone who says, no, we don't need, these basic things, a background check, a red flag law, which we haven't talked about. A really simple one is already in our federal law, which is that domestic abusers, you mentioned your friend, is it Portia? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And her son, who were shot and killed by her husband or partner just recently. And I'm, my heart goes out to her family. In an average month, 50 women are shot and killed by their partner in America, more than one a day. So domestic violence and guns is deadly for women. One thing that in federal law, domestic abusers, once you have a conviction or you plead to domestic abuse, you are a prohibited purchaser, which means you can't pass a background check. And until we have a background check, it doesn't really matter. But you're also a prohibited possessor. You can no longer possess. That's a lifetime ban on possessing guns. But in only 2 or 3 counties in the state do we have any procedures whatsoever for domestic abusers to surrender their firearms. We're not going in and saying, or the judges who, once they're released, are not saying, here are the procedures and the protocols for surrendering your firearm, because you can, in fact, many times they don't even tell them you're a prohibited possessor. Mm-hmm. Dallas County does it. They've gotten the mayor on board and their judges, because, we talk to law enforcement here in town about it, and they're like, yes, domestic abusers should not have firearms. And, in the past year and a half, 2 San Marcos police officers have been shot and killed serving domestic violence warrants. For law enforcement, it's really deadly, domestic violence calls.
So unpredictable.
Mm-hmm. But that's not up to the police. That's up to the DA, to the county judges, and to the county commissioners to say, we as a county are going to require that domestic abusers surrender their firearm.
So what specifically for Comal County, what has there been steps taken that the commissioners have done or judge has done, and what have they not done or that need to do?
I attended a presentation that the DA's office gave. The DA's office and our Crisis Center of Comal County had a grant from Texas Council on Family Violence, TCFV. I think we were a high. They had a grant to study and assist in reducing domestic violence, and I attended a presentation that was to law enforcement, to judges, and members of the DA office, plus the crisis center, about a gun surrender protocol and implementing it. And since 2017, 2018, I've been asking our DA to please implement this gun surrender protocol for domestic abusers, especially in light of the shooter in Sutherland Springs and his horrific past of domestic violence, family violence, and still being able to walk into an academy and get a gun. But so far, nothing has moved on that, even though it's something that would be helpful.
Why do you think that is? I mean, is it just they don't deem that important, or it's a political issue now, or?
A lot of people think guns are super political. We need to reach out to our schools and ask them to be sending home safe storage, responsible storage information with all these kids, at home during COVID. But people hear guns and they think, no, that's too controversial, and it's just not. It's just not. The things that responsible storage, that domestic abusers shouldn't have firearms. Those are not controversial. I can't speak for our DA, and I can't speak for our commissioner, but I know that it's something that would be well. And then I think about the incidents of actual law enforcement officers who have that domestic violence record themselves, can be an issue as well. So that's another can of worms.
I mean, I read it was over 50%, and then for a second marriage, it's 80%. Like it's astronomical.
Wow. And I don't know how that would work. I mean, then they couldn't have their service weapon, right?
What? Yeah, you're getting into like.
Yeah, that's a big. We'll just shut that.
A can of worms. But then you look into like the issue in our country right now with the Black Lives Matter, and how do the intersectionality of gun violence, police brutality, the inability or lack of gumption is maybe the right word, or leadership within local communities to take strong stance against violence, which is what it comes down to.
Well, yeah. I want to, when we talk about, so in Comal County, our gun violence, again, mostly looks like gun suicides and domestic violence. But when we talk about the gun violence in cities, I am excited about what Moms Do in Action is pivoting to. Like you introduced me and you talked about, most of us in this organization are middle-class suburban white women. And we got involved because of once our babies were in danger from gun violence. But communities of color have been suffering the impacts of these loose gun laws that just let everybody have a gun no matter what, for so long. And so we, over the 6 years that we've been around, I'm glad that we're focusing on diversity and equity and inclusion, and that's a slow shift. But I've had explicit trainings that have been great about recognizing implicit bias and working to rid myself of those biases, recognizing them first. And then how do you meaningfully reach out to communities of color to so that you're not doing the tokenism thing, you know?
Yeah.
So one thing that in the last year or so that Everytown and Moms Demand Action have been doing is really investing in local violence intervention programs. And right now, we're fundraising for several of those across the country. And one of them is one in Houston. It's called Houston Peace.
Mm-hmm.
And we can maybe post the link to that. But
Yeah.
we're fundraising for them. And, you know, it's relying on the people who live on in those communities to know what's best for their community and how to reduce the violence, and letting them take the lead instead of just a bunch of people like me coming in and saying, like, here's what you need to do, and whack the finger. So
part of what we do in land and food justice is, you know, there's a difference between talking about issues of land and food and feeding people, and then actually actively doing justice. And what does that mean? And part of it is when you're coming in, you know, from my own perspective, being a middle class white Protestant woman, and what does that mean to partner with communities of color or minorities to not come in and think like, oh, I'm going to just this like white savior complex that
right.
Unfortunately a lot of progressive white women tend to not recognizing those biases and coming in and doing a lot of times doing more harm than good, or not upholding or listening well enough to work with people and set up strategic partnerships with communities to make sure that your voice isn't the primary voice of what's heard. And learning from, okay, these are constantly looking inward to see, okay, what are those biases? What are my knee-jerk reactions? And how does that work in the overall system? Because this system has been here for hundreds and hundreds of years,
right.
And it's not going to go away overnight. And violence is so entrenched in power and control and domination, from not only with, you know, when here we're talking about gun violence, but you're talking about the food system, you're talking about redlining, you're talking about segregation, you're talking about gentrification, you're talking about school to prison pipeline, the ability to get loans in Comal County, it's the ability to, you had to go to a certain school, and you, even though you live across town, you're not allowed on boards, your zoning is treating different, you know, not being able to get permits to, it just is so entrenched all the way down the line. And I'm really thankful that you brought up the aspect of partnering and teaming up and helping to, when we have a seat at the table, that we're not the ones primarily talking, you know.
Yeah.
Ironically, while we're sitting at a table and talking.
I want to read this because I can't put it in my own words, but specifically about gun violence and communities of color, which are disproportionately affected by gun violence. It says, gun homicides, non-fatal shootings, and exposure to gun violence reflect and intensify this country's long-standing racial inequities. Individuals in some neighborhoods are impacted by gun violence at higher rates than other Americans, in part because of deliberate policy decisions that have resulted in segregated neighborhoods and underinvestments in Black and Hispanic communities. And these communities are disproportionately burdened by gun violence, which I think sums up what we were just talking about. So, you know.
In one of the latest policies here, and it's opportunity zones, you know, where investors from other places can come in and hire poverty areas and buy up all the property.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
There's a large zone that's south of Canyon Lake that the federal government has identified, and Texas has identified in Comal County.
As an opportunity zone?
Yeah, for opportunities for investors to come in and basically buy up those properties, flip them, enhance and flip, and then and push people out, you know, instead of, okay, well, why are these areas underserved? You know,
well, and it's already an issue that people, you know, wage hourly workers, right, cannot afford to live in New Braunfels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even our police and sheriffs are not,
right.
A lot of them.
Right.
So that is a whole nother layer to what happens when you have a police force and sheriffs and that are newbies, that aren't veterans, that haven't been through extensive trainings, that have, I would love to talk with the chief of police and the sheriff's department about these issues. And I have sent out emails and have yet to get anything back. But I think it's really important that the public hear what is being done. Are there body cams? What is your policies? What are your trainings that are different than 15 years ago? You know, what is it that you're actively doing that will help to protect the people of Comal County and intrinsically communities of color that have been disproportionately affected by violence?
So we should do that. I will tell you that Chief Weiber and Sheriff Reynolds are really great men, and I would love to hear those answers. And this is a little bit of a tangent, but a couple of years ago, someone reached out to me from the community and wanted to offer mindfulness and meditation training to the police free of charge. She's that's what she does for a living. And so I reached out to Chief Weiber and he said, we've got that going on already. So there is some progressive tactics there within the police department. So I'd like for them to demilitarize and focus more on those kind of de-escalation and trainings. But yeah.
Well, I'm going to bring up one thing that was brought up in 2018 that kind of shocked Texas and kind of sent out shockwaves through Texas, but even nationwide. And I think really kind of set gun violence prevention back was Beto's comment in a rally in Houston. Was it? Oh, it was a debate in Houston.
The debate, yeah. I was there. I was in the audience, yeah. We got some tickets. Moms Doing Action got some tickets.
And it was just for the audience. What exactly did he say?
He said, hell yeah, we're going to take your guns.
This is right after the shooting in El Paso.
Yes. So Colette knows, for the audience, that this is a favorite rant of mine because I was really mad. And I'm still mad. And I'm not speaking for the entire organization when I rant about this, but I'm right. And I do want to say for Beto, I do feel like it was right after El Paso, and he was operating from the mindset, it seemed to me, of a survivor of gun violence. He was traumatized. And so I think you felt the same way that I did, which was that he just set us back about 15 years.
He said the same. As a Democrat, as a progressive, I immediately was livid because I'm like, you just said the thing that we have not been saying for decades. And and mind you, I'm not even super involved like you are. My areas have been in other, but I still have always been a proponent no, you can keep your whatever gun you have as long as you responsibly store it. And But so
there are several parts of this that,
dispel any myths for the public.
we have been working so well, and it was also on the heels of a really tough 86 legislative session up in Austin, where the Texas Ledge expanded in many different ways the way that staff and teachers can be armed inside our public K-12 schools, which was just broke us.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had worked so hard. I mean, on average, I was up in Austin at least once a week, and running my head off trying to convince these the people in power that you can respect the Second Amendment. We don't want your guns if you're a law-abiding, responsible adult. And having given my personal guarantee in that relational canvassing with people I know here in town who are gun owners, we don't want your guns if you're a responsible, law-abiding adult. The part that personally bothered me was just, I know people who own military style long guns, and I'm not going to demonize them and make them a bad guy because they are subject to 30 years of pop culture that's told, especially, hetero white boys, that these guns are cool. I mean, from our movies to our music to our, the culture all around them said these are cool, and here's some toy ones, and here's the video game. So the other part is that, factually, the vast majority of gun deaths in this country are perpetrated with a handgun.
Right.
An assault rifle, which is
it
really
shifts the conversation away from the.
It's so, I mean, say you could snap up all the military style long guns. Right now, we would still just be, head and, I wouldn't say above, we would still have a gun death rate tens of times higher than other countries. It's this small. It also says to me that thing what I said when Moms Demand Action was founded, when a suburban white mom said, "Wait a minute, our babies are getting killed." It shifts the focus to the wrong thing when gun suicides and gun violence in cities perpetrated with handguns is what's killing Americans. And we know that it gave the other side, quote, this, pardon the verbiage, ammunition to use against. They do want to take the guns. And I mean, the crowd erupted and cheered because they don't understand the nuance of this conversation.
I was screaming. I was at home. I was screaming at my TV like, what? Oh.
I ranted for days. I was just, and I'm still, I loved what Beto did. I was so inspired by his campaign, and I think he was speaking from his heart, and it was wrong. It was wrong, and not everybody agrees with me, but it would imagine the political capital to do that, to take away this one type of weapon, and for what?
Yeah.
I mean, is that going to reduce the most gun deaths? And then what are we saying to our brothers and sisters of color? Like, we only care about these mass shootings that mostly affect white people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And, and El Paso was not. I mean, it was targeted at the Latinx community, but,
and one of the things that kind of what I mull over is just the gun trade and arms trade in general in our world today. And that's existed there's a great book called, I believe it's called Night of the Bombs. And it's the history of the nuclear weapon sales, but it goes back into the history of the development of the gun and the arms trade in general, and how the development of the nuclear weapons became part of the arms trade globally. And they go into the guy who wrote it is a nuclear physicist, and works with bombs. And I'm not remembering his name right now. I'll put it in a link below. But he talks about, this book came out about 10, 12 years ago when I read it, but talks about supplying, this kind of underground systemic setting up for communities of color to fail by supplying guns, and what that looks like. And then turn around and saying, well, look, they're killing their own. And
right.
just what that is like, well, wait a second. Like, and yet there's just so many layers to undoing the deeply entrenched hatred and oppression that exists in our country.
Well, and that our country was founded upon, that was built upon. And I know you too, but I still learn so much. I mean, from I was born and raised in Boulder, Colorado, and then I went and I taught in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I had so many mentors that were older Black women, fellow teachers, who were like, Molly, I was just really, I feel really blessed to have had them in my life to say, come over here and let me, think about this, something I never thought about. And then, as we get older, like learning about how, because Black people couldn't own property, they couldn't accrue wealth, and they could, just all these different, it's overwhelming, and it feels like it's coming to one of its heads right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about that Moms Demand Action is working right now with some community-based violence prevention programs, specifically one in Houston. What did you say? That Houston Peace? Is that
Houston Peace? The Houston Peace website. I think it's Houston, the number 4, Peace.
Okay, we'll put a link below.
Yeah, we'll link it.
Post this. And also, can you tell us a little bit about Wear Orange?
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry to cut you off on that.
No, it's perfect. No, it's perfect.
Full circle, because we're coming up on time.
Yeah. So this weekend is a National Gun Violence Awareness weekend, which is Wear Orange. It was started by a group of friends of a young lady, Hydea Pendleton, who was shot and killed just 2 weeks after she performed in Obama's second inaugural parade. Her friends asked people to wear orange. Orange is loud, it demands to be seen. It's also the color that hunters wear that says, don't shoot me. So we turn the country orange. Normally we're out in the community. Last Wear Orange, we went to the Hayes Caldwell Women's Center, cleaned up, did that, and we'll light landmarks orange and just turn the country orange. This year it's all virtual. The Texas chapter is doing Wear Orange Rocks, so we'll be painting rocks with the hashtag Wear Orange and some names of people who died from gun violence. And so there'll be a big, and then Friday night, I think the Austin group's doing a concert, and you can paint rocks. My friend Becca and I are painting rocks and talking to survivors on Saturday.
There's also ribbons, right?
Yes, there are. The Hayes and Comal Moms Demand Action group is, we're delivering ribbons, orange ribbons people can tie around their trees. And we just, so much is on social media right now, so we want people to wear orange, take a picture of themselves wearing orange, and share it with the hashtag Wear Orange, to bring awareness to the gun violence in this country.
So would, is there something that you would like to say to kind of wrap up, that to say to people who are watching this, who may have feel led or discerning to be involved, whether Republican or conservative, progressive, Democrat, who want to get involved in awareness with Moms Demand Action, and don't know how, and don't know what to do, that are kind of coming to the realization that common sense gun legislation is not an all or nothing Second Amendment or no Second Amendment kind of dichotomy. How would they reach out to you, or how reach out to you or Moms Demand Action? What are some things that they could do, and what are some? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, the easy thing to get to receive a welcome call from our people is you can text the word ready to the number 64433. Or you can download the Demand Action app in the Google Play or App Store, whatever, Apple. And you just put in your zip code. You can find events in your area. Of course, most of our events are virtual right now. We have come to realize over and over again that elections are pretty much the only thing that matters. And so our effort right after Wear Orange is to elect a gun sense majority to the Texas House. And we need boots on the ground for that on the virtual ground. We're going to be, we're organizing right now. We have a real chance to have a gun sense majority in the Texas House, which would affect, drawing fair boundaries for when we redistrict in 2020.
Right, which is huge.
And after spending blood, sweat, and tears up in Austin and getting nobody to listen to us about please don't arm our teachers or make it easier to arm our teachers, we're all in for the Texas House. We have a real chance for the first time in a very, very long time to do this. So that's where we are. But if you go ahead and sign up, if you text ready to 64433, or if you can also go on the website, just momsdemandaction.org, and get connected with your local group. But we need gun owners, and we need non-Democrats to say enough.
Mm-hmm. And it's, holding the NRA, and I think politicians accountable, and,
mm-hmm.
Also realizing that local elections, I'm going to give myself a little props here, that local elections will make a difference in your own community. That it's not, toting a party line is just for a position that's nonpartisan doesn't help keep the community safe. That it's about people's positions, like supporting proposals and examples of like Moms Demand Action in your local government. I'm having just to tune in for the audience, I'm having an interview tomorrow with Coffee with Colette, with Manaja, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right, into like Huerca, on racism and religion, and how deconstructing our part in the system. She's a Latina and comes from obviously a different perspective than I do, and then what it means to dissect that with religion. And so just for the audience, this conversation is going further. Stephanie Phillips is having a kind of a get together of people to read White Fragility. And some of us have already read that, but it just to also have a platform to what does it mean to start to interpret and dive into your biases, and to be a leader within your community and recognize the entrenched trauma and historical trauma that exists and the political structures that hold that system up and make it possible. So I want to thank you, Molly, for coming. And I am so thankful to be your friend. It's just, she is really a warrior when it comes to the Texas House and Senate and really having those difficult conversations, and just works tirelessly, in an area that is not a sexy issue. It's not sexy like food can be. Everybody likes to talk about gardens. Gun control, not necessarily.
Not
and
so much. It makes you a real hit at parties, I'll tell
you. Back when I did government relations with torture, yeah. I mean, I feel
yeah, that's another one.
Yeah, it was no. The people are like, I don't want to hear this, Colette. So I want to thank you, and would love to invite you back in the future to follow up and see kind of what's going on in the legislature, what's going on in Comal County, and would love the aspect of possibly getting together the police chief and then Sheriff Reynolds to get together. Maybe all four of us could talk on these specific issues, and we can see their policies and trainings that they do to help promote trust with them within the community, but also recognize whether real or perceived mistrust that exists within the community as well.
All right, let's make that happen. And thank you, Colette. I can't wait until you sit on the commissioner's court.
Yay! Well, I'll talk to you soon, and thanks for coming. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Let's have a hard time turning this thing off. Okay, there it is.